So, Carrie-Anne, welcome to what is the second You podcast. As you can see, Maeve has left me completely on my own, which is not good news. And I know you've battled through traffic and bridges and mountains to get here. Yep. So first of all, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For the audience, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'll try. So my name is Carrie-Anne Reid. I am a therapist. I do a therapy known as brain working recursive therapy. And I do that with the Scott Martin Foundation for young people, and that's how we met in the first place.
It is, yeah.
So you were showing us your app, which we were all obviously really engaged with, and really looking forward to what's going to come out in the future from that. So, and then obviously we started having a discussion, and that's what brings me here today. So, I am 46 years old. I live with my partner. I have two young stepkids, and so in my youth, if you like, I lived in the Middle East. I was an air hostess for one of the airlines out there. Came back here, and then joined the police. And I've done that for 16 years, and it's just in the last couple of years that I've added being a therapist to that.
I love doing these podcasts because every time I do them, I learn so much more about people than I did beforehand. So it's clear, and there's loads of places I want to go today, but it's really clear that when we first met, your passion for mental health and looking after mental health was really clear. So tell us a bit about why you're motivated around that particular area, what keeps you going, and in particular on your counselling and therapy, what you get from those sessions personally and what impact you see.
Yeah. So it's hard to say where it comes from, I guess, because you sometimes don't know where your passion for anything comes from. However, so I would say we've all experienced trauma. Mm-hmm. We've all had to battle through life because, as we've discussed before, life is not easy. No. So for me, I'm lucky in a sense that either I have the personality, or it was maybe seeing how strong my mum was, or something made me and my sister a lot stronger and able to get through what for other people might have been more difficult to come through. So we have always remained positive, and for that I'm just extremely grateful. However, I got an injury, tore my ACL at the trampoline park showing off.
So, as you do
in my 40s, I'm a lad. So I was off work, and I found that really difficult.
Okay.
So I had a friend actually that does the brain working recursive therapy, and she did that on me. She was just like, oh, well, you've got this time, you should really look after yourself. Yep. You should take this time to learn new things, and just really saying to me, don't just sit here and dwell on it. It's pointless dwelling on it. So use the time. So I did. And she did some therapy on me, which I think made a massive difference. But I also did some work on myself, and you don't ever know what percentage, helped with which. But so I started looking at YouTube, as you do when you're really bored. Yeah. And I
beats that, doesn't it?
Yeah,
yeah,
it does. It definitely does. Yeah. But I was looking for things to improve myself. I wasn't, just looking at YouTube shorts or something like that. So I found someone called Aaron Abke, and he did Science of the Mind or something like that. Is the groupie videos were called, and it was actually all about letting go of your ego. And not in a kind of not in a vain way, but in actually your ego is only there to serve you, to improve you.
Okay.
It's not there for you to judge yourself. It's not the way we look at it. We all have an ego. It's there to help us survive. We should only be looking at it to help us improve what we reflect on ourselves as being things we can improve on, not what people tell us about ourselves. So I actually found myself becoming less and less concerned about what people thought of me, and just interested in who I was as a person. And if I was the best person that I could be, then it really didn't matter what anyone had to say about me or think about me. It only mattered what me and the people around me, the closest people, thought of me. And that was a massive turning point.
I love that. Yeah. I absolutely love that, because so much of our energy goes into trying to please or meet the perceived expectations of others.
Absolutely.
And it's draining,
Yeah.
right? And so having yourself as the ultimate direction and core set of values that you can just improve upon and check in with yourself constantly,
course,
right?
yeah.
But that mindset is really interesting. So is that, the impact that therapy and that learning had on you, I guess now you're now sort of taking that and passing it on, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of hoping to do. So from a friend that gave me that therapy, I just kept saying to her, I wish I could do that for people. What you've done for me, I wish I could do for other people. And she said to me, you can. And she was like, you keep saying you want to be more interesting.
Yeah.
Was what I kept saying, less boring. But she was like, no, just say more interesting. Yeah. Because I always felt like I wasn't that interesting a person. So she said, well, you actually are. However, you obviously there's something inside you that wants to do more. That's why you feel like that.
Yep.
So I did. And I did the training over the course of a year. And it was never really intended to take off the way it has, if you like. It was really for family, friends, colleagues potentially that would need it. And that's all I was really going to use it for.
Yep.
But then I came across the Scott Martin Foundation. And the rest of that is history, but we'll talk about that a bit later.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, so that's where my passion for mental health comes from, that and the story I read about the Scott Martin Foundation and then the work that I started doing. So my passion has actually grown over time as I've met people and helped people, and that's where it comes from, I guess. That motivation to do more comes from seeing the work that you've already done.
And you see the benefits play out, right?
Yeah.
And it's often the case, isn't it? You look at things in life and there are so many challenges, there are so many things we're all drawn to accomplishing, or challenges that we're drawn to overcoming. And it becomes overwhelming. Yeah. And so that can lead to a downward spiral. And I think, certainly from my experience, just having a handle on something and inching it forward, so you feel like you're making progress there, it almost gives you some sense of control back. And with just an inkling of control, I've moved that thing forward 1%. It gives you a building confidence to say, now I'm going to move this one 3%, and I'll try and do that one 2%. And that brings me on to kind of, everyone's got this, juggling of different hats in life, and it's stressful, right? It's super stressful. What hat you're wearing, who have you got to deliver for, making sure you fulfill your commitments with family and friends and colleagues, and are you looking after yourself? Because in that noise, there's so much potential distraction that you forget that actually, unless you can be the best version of yourself, you're not going to be the best version for everyone else in your community or your network. So that self-empowerment piece, do you think that's important as well? And realizing that you can take control of some things whilst others you have to kind of let go. And that might be a temporary thing, right? Doesn't mean you have to let them go forever, but is there something there that is a good thing for people to acknowledge and realise?
Yeah, that is the big thing. So when it comes to anxiety, depression, low mood even, where it doesn't hit the threshold of actual clinical depression, all these things that people suffer from is in a way self-inflicted because we expect too much of ourselves. Or we are not comfortable to push things like that 1% that you were saying, because either you've been downtrodden or people say you can't do it or anything like that. So one step in any direction is still going in a direction. And it's taking that one step. It's taking that tiny step to say, oh, actually I made it this far. If you were crossing a bridge, one of these things in Capilano in Vancouver, a big suspension bridge.
In where?
Vancouver. Another place I've been. And it's really frightening. And my sister and I always hated it but loved it, if you know what I mean, because it's
Equal
such an
measure.
achievement. When you go over it. And it's what you see on the other side of it is beautiful. Okay. So it's worth the trip. But it's horrible. And people think it's funny to swing it while they're on it, so that makes it worse. However, you take the tiny steps over that bridge one at a time and you get to the other side. So I suppose life is like that. Someone might start swinging that bridge when you're in the middle of it, and you want to punch them, but you just keep going. You just keep going. You say, "Excuse me, could you stop that?" as nicely as you can, and you just keep going. You get to the other side, and that's where it all kind of makes it worthwhile. But yeah, absolutely, that self-empowerment you were talking about as well. We need that. we need to, and you, like you say, making time for everybody else. You can't do that unless you make time for yourself.
Yep.
So even during the last year, I found that because the needs of the young people were so great, I was doing at one point 3 nights a week doing that therapy. And that left me with one night during the week for me and my partner. And the weekends are obviously taken up.
And that's not enough,
It wasn't.
No,
It wasn't
no.
enough. You know, and I'm trying to, in that time, try to cram in housework, every other thing.
Yeah.
I did not see my friends really for months
Yeah.
when I think about it. So that's when I'd said, no, actually, let's put it down to 2.
Yeah.
And then I've got more energy to help the people that I'm
Much
actually
better,
helping.
yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I would do 5 nights a
Of
week
course.
if I could. It's
Yeah, but
just
you
not
can't do
possible.
everything,
No,
can
you
you?
can't do everything.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important that we look after ourselves, because if you can't help anybody else, you can't be present for anyone else, you can't enjoy a relationship with anyone else
Yeah.
until you look after yourself.
Spot on. And so when people are wobbling that bridge, which is a great metaphor for life, right? And sometimes it wobbles a little bit, and sometimes the bloody thing's going all over the place, right? But I often think about go-to coping mechanisms. And, you know, one of mine was definitely the drink, right? So that was my release mechanism, and it became an issue, right?
Yeah.
A challenge,
Yeah.
and not in a huge way, but it became
Enough
an
for you to
unhealthy
recognise it,
enough
yeah.
for me to recognize it, and it became an unhealthy relationship versus the fun
Yeah.
that I was having initially with it, and actually it worked as a release mechanism because it pulled me away from the stresses of everyday life, and it didn't force me in a coercive way, but it enabled me to just switch off,
Yep.
completely switch off. But there's a danger to that. So in terms of coping mechanisms, I know when we first met, one of the first things we talk about was festivals.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, there's a festival culture and a drinking culture and all the rest of it that goes with festivals, right? Many stories there, I'm sure. But in terms of coping generally, is it different strokes for different folks? Is it you have to find what works for you, and actually, you know, that takes time, and you shouldn't beat yourself up for the things that maybe don't quite work but are working in the current moment. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, alcohol and drugs do become an issue for people because, exactly as you said, they relax you. They take away that stress of everyday life and the difficulties for that period of time. The issue obviously comes when, 1, you need it, and 2, the next day, whenever you wake up, everything's still there. You still got to deal with everything. So that's where it becomes a danger. And unfortunately, in the society that we live in, because of all the compounded trauma, you know, over the generations, we do have an issue with that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a totally separate issue. And thankfully, a lot of organisations are becoming more trauma informed in that respect. So we're not looking at people just as drug users, as alcoholics. We're looking to say, actually, you know what, there'll be a reason for that.
Absolutely.
Nobody decides that's
Nope.
the life that they want. So, so it's about getting these people and trying to get them actual proper help, not even in terms of rehab, because we don't have a lot of resources for that, but in terms of things like, let me help you get a house again, let me help you get a GP, let me help you get, you know, get you through court for this case, and then we'll deal with everything. It's all about that practical help.
And that's the kind of 1%, 2%
Yeah,
gains
it is.
that lead to bigger gains, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So thankfully, in the UK, and we are becoming more trauma informed. All the organisations are, and so that's going to help in that respect. In terms of how we would have a release, yeah, it really is about finding what works for you. Because I could say to people, go and do guided meditations, they're brilliant. I love them. I do that every night, kind of thing, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I don't want to listen to somebody else's voice when I go to sleep.
Yeah.
So very much. And also, when you try it, you have to give everything a chance. So you can't try one and wake up the next day and go, that hasn't worked. I still feel the same, right?
Yep.
So you've got to try it, like, say, 15 nights in a row or something. You have to commit to these things.
Yep.
Whether it's exercise, whether it's, you know, a hobby, you have to commit to it. And you have to look after your mental health in the way you would look after a physical injury.
100%.
You know?
Yeah.
So if you had a physical injury, you would do the physio, not just once. You know, you keep doing it, and you would do it. They tell you is going to work.
Yep.
So, and it's exactly the same with your mental health. You find the things that are going to work, or that have worked for other people. You try them out for yourself. If that doesn't work, let it take you to something else that might work. Just keep trying. You would do that if you physically had an ailment. You would keep trying until you got it better.
I say this. I was going to say I say this on every podcast. I say this on the first podcast, and I'll say it again. You know, people are used to and accept dealing with their physical health, and more than that, they understand that sometimes their physical health is not good, and sometimes it's really good, and they understand it and they accept it. See, with mental health, completely different picture, and the struggle to accept that it can be good, it can be bad, and it's a journey. So not judging any one moment in time by the high or by the low, it's about the long term. So yeah, really interesting. So tell us about, obviously we met through Sam at the Scott Martin Foundation. Tell us specifically what they're doing and the impact they're having, because it's fantastic.
Yeah. So the Scott Martin Foundation was set up because on the 1st of January 2021 it would have been, Scott sadly and tragically took his own life just before he turned 17. He had been trying to get help, was with CAMHS, for many different reasons, he didn't get the help that he needed. So Sam decided pretty quickly, actually, and hats off to her, but probably that's what keeps her going as well.
Yeah.
But she decided really quickly that, first and foremost, it wasn't the first in his group of friends either. It wasn't the first, and it wasn't the first in the area. So everyone was thinking, what is going on here? That this is tragic. This can't happen again. So she set up the foundation because people had started their Just Giving page as they do, and she was thinking, what am I supposed to do with this money? So she was like, actually, let's set up a foundation. Let's get people the help that they need. So completely unselfishly, there she is in this horrendous grief, saying to herself, well, actually, I'm going to make something of this. So set up Scott Martin Foundation, and so they have myself, obviously, but they've also got a couple of counsellors.
Okay.
They team up with a couple of local organisations that help young people with mental health, FADAM, and the local places that all get set up. So the young people that come, it's adults as well actually that come,
Okay.
but it's predominantly for young people. But the young people that come along, they get a choice of all the different things. So she's also got boxing, boxing classes just for women, and just on your own, or you can join the group.
And Scott was a great boxer,
Scott was a
right?
great boxer, yeah. Scott was actually a great boxer, a great footballer, really popular with the girls, and a really handsome young man.
So
and
this
funny.
is the point, isn't it?
Yeah,
So from
it
the
is.
outside looking in, society would see him as, on the path to, a great life, right? That's what makes it so tragic.
It is, and he had a great personality, and I never met him, sadly never met him, but Sam would tell you stories and you can just feel his presence from those stories.
It's lovely, yeah.
So it's, he just had everything going for him in that sense. However, there was still something going on up here, and I think it scared him. It scared him that he couldn't get away from it, or it scared him that it wasn't changing and he wasn't getting the help that he needed, and it was just obviously too much. And that, for me, any suicide, especially in a young person, is one too many, because it should never be.
It's unnecessary, isn't
it? Sam put up something interesting recently saying people commit suicide.
Yeah.
And that should be a word that I think we get away from, and I totally agree with that, because committed sounds like you've done something wrong.
Yep.
People take their own lives because they are in extreme pain and they don't know how to get away from it, and they think it's their only option. Now, for me, that is so sad, because I believe that we can help everybody. It's just getting them that help, making sure that is there for people when they absolutely need it.
Yeah. And do you think that's just, through everyday normal actions and touch points? So is it reaching out to, because collectively, we can reach out to friends and colleagues and just meaningful conversation and touching base with people. And is that a large part of it?
It will be part of it. I don't know how much Scott spoke to his friends about how he was feeling, or how much young boys do talk about that. And I know that there's campaigns to tell them to talk more. I just don't know how ingrained that is in the younger society these days, but it's really important it becomes that.
Yeah.
So I'd seen something on a documentary before, and it was ask your friends how they are, and the general answer will be, yeah, okay, how are you?
Yeah.
But then ask them again.
Okay.
How are you?
Yeah.
So you go, yeah, that was the polite bit done, but how are you actually doing?
Yeah.
And young men, all men really need to talk more.
Men definitely have an issue with it, yeah.
Women, yeah. Well, the thing is as well, I think suicide in young men between sort of 16 and 40 is going up. Part of it will be they don't talk, they try and hide that. They try and hide how you're feeling because maybe people are ashamed of it, or they don't know if anybody else feels the same. And actually, if you start talking, you'll find that probably half your group feels the same as you.
Exactly. I think with, and again, just talking from my experience with men, that there's a kind of innate bravado,
yes,
right? And men want to be seen in a certain way. So talking about things that are difficult or that they can't address or reconcile is perceived by themselves as a weakness, and therefore they don't talk about it, which is a real challenge. You've got to talk about it because, as you say, a lot of people, we're all in this life together, right? And it's very unusual for something to happen to somebody that hasn't happened, 1,000 other times, a million other times to other people. So talking about it is, really, really helpful. So I often have this thought as well, just in communication. So you've got the technology now, and the prevalence is towards kind of mass migration to technology and communication platforms. And there's a plethora of them, right? There's, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and it just goes on and on and on, right? Exactly. So my question, though, is, do you think that influx of platforms and technology has actually eradicated or degraded our ability to bond in the way that humans are meant to bond?
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny that we met through an app, obviously, right? But I will talk about your app, but I think that's a meaningful app, okay? I don't think TikTok's meaningful. And actually, I think it makes people less focused in general, because you expect everything to be 15 seconds long. So you go to school and you're expecting every class to be 15 seconds long and funny.
And funny, yeah. Why aren't you funny?
I can't make a video of this. And YouTube used to be quite educational in a way. And now it's all YouTube shorts. And we watch people doing the things that we should be doing. So we watch people play games. No, play the game yourself.
It's reflecting outwards, isn't it? It's always looking outwards.
Yeah. So I have a real bugbear about digital devices. Okay, so it's great. It's fantastic to keep in touch. Like, my family all live in Vancouver and Belfast, so it's great to keep in touch through things like Facebook.
Yep.
I wouldn't probably be able to stay as close to them as I do if I didn't have those things. So in using it for what it's meant for, I think it's a good thing, right? But where we have an issue now, and there's a book called Lost Connections, Johann Hari, I think, Lost Connections, and it was all about, we have lost our connection to each other.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah, but we have.
Yeah.
So one of the human needs that we have is to live in groups.
Yep.
Okay, so we need to be connected to each other.
Yep.
If we don't have that, there is a gap. And those gaps start to provide anxious feelings because you're not living how you're supposed to live.
Yep.
You don't know that.
Yep.
You're not aware that that's what's causing it, but that is what's causing it. It's these lost connections. So absolutely, you go out now, it's the summer holidays, the parks are empty. Right? When we were young, they would have been full of kids playing. In fact, if you even had a park, or you'd make your own park, but you would be out from morning to night. And I don't want to sound like an old fogey.
I was going to say, there's loads of young folk going to listen to this in the future and say, there they go again.
Yeah, and it's not, but we had fun.
Yeah,
we ended up with stitches. We ended up in hospital. But
that sounds like fun.
It was fun. We had fun, and when you were outside, you were talking to people. That's the big thing, right? So people are now phoning each other during the summer holidays. Do you want to go online and play Fortnite? Right, so they're not seeing each other. They're not really speaking to each other. Just playing a game. Now there is a place for gaming, getting lost in a game.
Absolutely,
but
it's a form of entertainment, right? And we've always had entertainment.
The TV, movies, everything.
Yeah.
But it should be limited.
Yeah.
It absolutely should be limited. The responsible thing to do for children and young people is to limit their time doing these things and actually get them out playing.
Yep.
And I know you have to drag them kicking and screaming to start with, but actually they'll start to enjoy it and they'll realise, oh, this feels quite good because this is how you're supposed to live.
So my son, I've got a son and a daughter. My son is 6 and I am not kidding. When you take him away from the front of a screen, that screen could be, a television or a phone and a game, and he'll transform. As soon as you put him outside, he'll transform into this, honestly, I'm not kidding you, just beautiful child.
Yep.
A smile on his face. He starts to radiate, and you're almost looking at like a Jekyll and Hyde situation just by putting him in the environment. And I think, you're bang on, right? High five on that, by the way. I think not only have we lost our ability to connect as well as we should be, or as we've always done, but we've lost connection with the environment. We've lost real depth of meaning on what it is to be human.
Yep.
And, the irony, by the way, of the app isn't lost on me because we're using technology in that example, to try and help people understand themselves. But and obviously people are going to be listening through a device probably to this podcast. So the irony isn't lost, but I think you bang on. It's about balance, right? And it's about trying to find the things that work for you. But there has to be a balance.
Yeah, and it's what you use it for.
And it's
if you're
what you
going on
use
a
it for.
digital device to use an app that records your mental health and makes you aware of how am I feeling today and why am I feeling that way and what was I doing at the time, that's all for good. So it's like everything. If you use it for good, use it in the way it's intended, yeah, that's fine. I don't think it was ever intended when the mobile phones and everything came out that people will spend their entire day looking at it.
The biggest challenge, I think, Carrie-Anne, on them, and this is just my experience, the biggest challenge is I have gone on countless times to my device with the specific objective of doing something, right? So I know before I pick that device up what I'm going to do. And that might be respond to an email, it might be check the weather, it might be, look at the football results or check the news. An hour or 2 hours later, and I'm not kidding, I won't even have done the thing that I picked it up to do, and I've lost that time. It's gone. Yeah. And that's the danger of them.
It is the danger. And I don't know if you ever saw the documentary that was, the name totally escapes me just now, but it was about how they draw you in.
Yes.
The algorithms it's used to draw you in.
Yes.
And it's actually quite frightening because you see yourself in that documentary. You go, I've totally done that.
Yeah.
But what we need to realise, I suppose, that the people that are trying to draw us in, they're not drawing us in for our benefit.
Definitely not.
That's for their benefit.
Absolutely.
And that's what we have to be careful of. Don't allow people who are trying to benefit themselves, these large organisations, to draw you in to then lose 2 hours of your day and not do the thing you went on to do in the first place.
And one of the most valuable things I think we have as humans is time.
Yeah.
And it's only when we run out of it that we realise how valuable it is. So what we do with that time is really crucial. Yeah. It's really crucial. So I want to talk about positive mental health. So whenever I have a conversation about mental health, it's always around, or it tends to be driven towards all of the challenges. And quite rightly, because they're where we need to go to have the biggest impact of positive change. Yeah. But just like physical health, there's bad physical health and good physical health. I want to talk about positive mental health. So I think we should be applauding those who have really good mental health, and we should be looking at them for ideas, inspiration, motivation, creativity around introducing some of those aspects that would work for us. Yeah. Why don't we talk about positive mental health? And why is it that when we talk about mental health, it's all darkness and stigmas and everything else? Why do you think that is? Is it the stigma?
It's human nature to look for the negatives because it's all about survival, isn't it? So when there's something positive, that's not a risk to us, right? So we don't need to worry about that. That's good. That's all happening on its own. That's taking care of itself. What we always look at, because of that, the brain's need to survive, is the negatives.
Yeah. How
do we improve on that? How do we fix that?
Yeah.
That's what the brain's telling you. So, but what you're right, absolutely right. What we should be focusing on is positive mental health, because that will help the people who have poor mental health to look towards something else and say, that might work for me, actually.
As a species, we've created huge global events that laud and applaud humans at the top of their physical game. So we hang precious metals around their neck and say, wow, and we stand up and we give them a big round of applause.
And they come back and we give them a ceremony.
And then we give them a ceremony,
country,
right? Yeah. Why don't we why haven't we created something to recognise and applaud people with good mental health? And I'm not suggesting in the same way.
It's because they can't measure it.
Okay.
It's because so performance-wise, athletes at the top of their game, you can have the Olympics, Commonwealth Games, you can measure that. You can't measure positive mental health.
It's subjective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's the challenge.
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so I guess leading on to the app then. Mm-hmm. So we're still at prototype stage.
Yeah.
We're still working through a myriad of different technical challenges and figuring out what features and functions are going to have the most positive impact. But obviously a part of the early trials we've done with the early adopters, there is a significant amount of measurement in there. Mm-hmm. But this, what we've done is really only for self-reflection or introspection, and being able to allow users to use the app in the way that's most impactful for them. So what you've seen so far, and don't hold any punches, by the way, if it's utter nonsense and we need to kick it in the bin, then that's fine as well. But what we've seen so far, are we on the road to introducing opportunities for users to be more self-aware, more self-conscious, make better decisions for themselves, and therefore impact their groups, their communities, their friends, their family in a more positive way? Is the direction good, or have we still got a lot to learn?
Yeah, well, you used the word there that on the first day we met, I said how important that is, that awareness. So your app will bring awareness to people. So to say they put in 2 or 3 times a day how they're feeling. So first and foremost, that makes them aware of how they're feeling. It makes them have to think about it. So they don't just go through the day feeling low, not thinking about where is that coming from, what have I been doing, who was I with, how can I help myself get out of that low feeling today, why am I in a bad mood, why am I tense, why am I this? As soon as you recognise the feeling, you start to assess, where is that coming from, why have I got that, Oh, and what can I do about it? It's all linked, but until we have that awareness and make ourselves become aware, then you're at risk of just allowing your feelings to overcome you every day and just float through.
Yeah.
And so, first and foremost, that awareness I think is fantastic. I was really excited about your app that day we left your office. And apologies for not using it every day. I did start, but it's just because I don't have that issue, because I have positive mental health. I just stopped filling in, if you know what I mean. For me, do you know, that's a good thing actually. If people start using your app and then they stop because they've got positive mental health, that's a good thing. However, you'll still want them to use it for all the other communities it's going to take them to. I think your direction is fantastic. I think showing people a dashboard of how their moods changed over time. They can see the improvements. They can see what they did to improve that. You're talking about taking people to, I know that's in the future, but taking people to other communities that could help them.
Absolutely.
Taking people to other communities that are with like-minded people, or even just a place at the end that sustains that good mental health.
Yep.
So take them to the all the, guided meditations, all the things that you're going to do to sustain that good mental health. Because once you've got it, you can't let it go. You have to keep doing those things, because otherwise you just dip again.
And letting people understand, as you say, the awareness, the consciousness around the highs and the lows, and both are normal, by the way. But letting them understand the contextual information, as you say, what they were doing, where they were at, who they were with, on both the highs and lows, is a really important step in the direction of a long-term journey around understanding yourself. And if you can understand yourself, what makes you tick, what motivates you, and actually what you dislike, that allows you to make better decisions, I think. So that's very kind feedback. It's really interesting you touched upon kind of just pausing and not filling it in because you're in a good place. And it's interesting because there tends to be 2 different types of groups. So it tends to be a group that fill it in relentlessly when they're in challenging times, and then when they're in a good time they step away, because why would I need to fill it in? I'm okay, right? Yeah, it's good. But there's another group that actually want to fill it in when good things are happening, and I think that's more of a so they can reflect back. When bad things are happening, they're not using it. And so there are these disparate groups. There are some in the middle that do both, but it's really interesting. And it also takes me back to kind of counting calories. Whenever you have a cake or a pint of beer, you go, oh, I didn't really have that one. I won't put that one in, right? So the stats look better, but that's not what it's about, right? Because that's just cheating yourself. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is reflect back the most accurate set of data so that you can make the best decisions.
Yeah, and that takes complete honesty. You have to be honest about yourself to yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself, how can you be honest with anybody else?
Exactly.
But it's all about, and I just think for me as well, in that time that I was off work, I changed my attitude to the outside world, I think, in a way as well, where I just focused on coming from a place of kindness all the time. So do you know how we're so judgmental as people?
Yep.
Right? And you'd walk along the street and you'd see someone else, you go, why are they wearing that?
Aye.
Right. Well, what has that got to do with me?
Yep.
First and foremost, how is that any of my business?
Yep.
So now I find myself looking at people and going, good for you for being so, flamboyant and just coming from a place of kindness instead. And actually that changes your complete attitude. So it's little things like that we can reflect on ourselves and say, am I a judgmental person? Am I always kind? Now, we can't always be kind, obviously. But am I always kind? Am I coming from a good place? Am I the best version of myself?
Perfect.
Right? And if you're not, then work on that.
Yep.
Don't beat yourself up about it. Just work on it.
Yep.
Become that better version of yourself.
I love this. And what it's made me think of is the first time we met, this podcast, every time we're together, the mood lifts, right? And sometimes that can put pressure on people, and it's not meant to. But what springs to my mind is the very fact we're doing this podcast, there's an opportunity for people to get the same positive energy from you that I'm getting. And I think that's a really great thing, because it just takes one little soundbite for somebody to latch onto and say, you know what, actually, that's a really good point, and that hasn't crossed my mind before. I'm going to give that a go. And that could be the catalyst for change, right? So doing things like this hopefully gets it to a wider audience and enables somebody to catch hold of that metaphorical branch and help themselves up from the riverbank, if that makes sense. I've also got you to thank for the term collective consciousness. I seem to remember. So one of the things we're aiming to do with You Understood is to be very transparent with a anonymized collective consciousness. And I think there's fascinating opportunities for reflection, not just on an individual level, but on a societal level, particularly as it pertains to events that are happening in the world. We've gone through some significant challenges and still are going through some significant challenges. If you look at, energy prices and the cost of living and, the war in Ukraine, I mean, it's tough out there, right? And then we've just come off the back of the pandemic.
And these things have a massive impact
on
people. And we come off the back of the pandemic and we're hoping for better times.
Absolutely.
And then we get hit with massive increases in all the prices. Because it's not just the fuel prices. It's not just your energy. It's the food. You look at it, even before I add my alcohol to the shopping bill at the end of the week, I'm like, is that including the vodka in that? So put it in anyway. So it is. But and for a lot of people that lived sort of to the point of their means previously, that pushes them way beyond that. And that's a massive stress in people's lives. So even in our organisation, thankfully from the top down, they're saying, how can we help, people to live more efficiently? So are we going to, move people closer to where they live so they're not spending money on energy? So, even an organisation like the police are thinking for the well-being of police officers.
That's amazing.
We need to look at that as well. And we need to think about that. And to me, that wouldn't have happened years ago, that interest in your well-being. But even for massive organisations now, that's becoming the main focus, because people are what make organisations tick or, keep going. So if you don't look after the people, and enable them to look after themselves, then you're going to have a workforce who's stressed, going off sick, So so even organisations now are looking to say, actually, positive mental health will help our organisation
hugely. And if you distill it down, it doesn't matter how an organisation, a group, a charity, a corporation presents themselves, they're ultimately built up by a group of individuals. Mm-hmm. And those individuals have real lives. Yeah. And all of those individuals have challenges, good and bad mental health. So making sure that you focus on that is absolutely vital. Mm-hmm. I just want to touch upon the police, just for a second. So for me, I've always wondered, and I'm sure many others listening, what it's like, right? So in the front line, I imagine, the tough challenges around that those frontline services in terms of seeing almost the worst of society and the stresses and the strains that must put on individuals. And I often wonder, does that impact, the frontline workers? And it must, right? So I want to just see if that's true, but also, give us some positivity around, I mean, I didn't know, for example, that the police were thinking about well-being, right? And that's a great message to send out and to be transparent about. But, the yin and yang, the positive and negative, just talk about your experience in the police, because you've been 16 years, 16 you said.
Years, yeah,
I mean, that's a significant service, right?
Yeah, I'm halfway through.
Over the hill, as they say, over the hill,
almost at retirement. Right. Being in the police is... Right, so I suppose it is a difficult job, right? However, for me, it is one of the best jobs you could ever do. And I don't know if everybody in the organisation feels like that, right? Yeah. Maybe some people don't feel as valued as they should, because, like everyone else just now, it's the pay rise issue, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so people don't feel valued in that sense, right? But apart from that, the job is fantastic. It is difficult. It is. And some days you're like, why am I doing this job?
Yeah.
But we see people... Not so much the worst of people, but we see people at the worst points in their life, I guess.
Okay.
At the most desperate points of their life. It is not nice for anyone to get arrested, right? They don't wake up that morning thinking, I think I'll get arrested today because that's actually a really good laugh,
Yeah.
It's people commit crime for a reason. Generally, there'll be something in their background. So again, as a trauma-informed organisation, we're now looking more at that as well. So, because there's no point having repeat customers all the time, that you could have helped 10 arrests back.
Yeah, so instead of looking at the remediation, look at the prevention, right?
Let's say, do you need some help here? Would that stop you from committing crime?
Yeah.
And if you do, we can refer you on. So that's what they're doing, and I think that's amazing.
That's a great thing.
I think it's amazing. Yeah. And as I say, that wouldn't have happened years ago. And, speaking to my sister, who is a qualified social worker and she's got her master's in counselling, so very intelligent girl. She says this, this should have happened years ago with all organisations in the UK. So we're maybe a bit slow on the uptake, probably, but at least we're doing it now.
That's the thing, isn't it? There's no point in lamenting the fact that it hasn't happened before, because you can't change it, right? But you're doing it now, and that can only be a huge positive. Yeah,
I think so. For those, because remember, we work in communities that are steeped in poverty, and so people are desperate.
Of course.
So if someone came to me and said, I won't mention any shops, right? So someone's just stole washing powder worth £5. Oh my God, can you imagine how desperate they must have been to do that, right? They want to wash their kids' clothes for going to school.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not a crime. Well, it is a crime.
Yeah,
technically it's a crime, but it's not. It's people are desperate. But also, yes, I see the worst of people, because we also deal with major crime, so it's the desperate people and the people who are just evil.
And those two are very different, right? And that's the distinction between the two.
Apart, and for me, I've been really lucky in my career. I've done a lot of specialist roles, so dealing with the highest levels of criminality. So actually feeling like you do make a difference, actually feeling like you do get justice for families, that is... that is so rewarding. That it would be nice not to have to do that in the first place, but when you have to, it's nice to actually be part of that and to say, well, you know what, today we got justice for that family. So it is a stressful job at times, but believe it or not, a lot of police officers actually thrive on what you would think would be pressure. But when we get a major incident or something like that, actually you just kick into action. Really? The adrenaline goes, it's amazing. And you just think, right, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to make a difference here. Without me here, this thing wouldn't, this would be a shambles. Nobody would know what they're doing. So you take control and you deal with what's in front of you. And it's a really, really satisfying job.
So there's two things. The change in direction, is that being measured in terms of that positive going on the front foot? Are we starting to see, because you talk about what's the point of doing it unless you're aware, right? Is this having an impact? So I'm guessing he's starting to look at that, without going into too much detail, but is this having a positive impact? And to state the obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, thank you very much, for doing what you do, because I don't think frontline workers generally, whether it's police or doctors and nurses, paramedics, et cetera, but what I loved, and that's probably a wrong term to use, but what I absolutely loved about the pandemic is that it reset society's values on who and which roles are important and vital. And all of a sudden, those, millionaires and billionaires needed their logistics drivers, right? And needed people to look after their mothers who were ill. So I just wish, talk about teachers and, all of those roles that are vital. I wish society could, truly, without using the soundbite, because I'm not sure I agree with it, but truly level up society in a value-based way, because it's just wrong, right? And
I don't know how long that I would agree with you that it kind of reset it, and it showed the priorities of actually, knocking the studio apart here. It showed the priorities of who, when it comes down to it, actually who's really important here.
Exactly.
It isn't the billionaires, that are trying to do various things. It is the people who keep the world going. It is your workers.
The engine, isn't it?
It is, that drives it.
Yeah.
So, but the issue is, I think, unfortunately for the police, the pandemic, like everybody else, yes, thank you, frontline workers. However, public confidence in the police, there's been a few incidents that's brought that down, unfortunately, more down south than up here. And that is really unfortunate because, as you know, no police officer would want to be associated with any of that.
Absolutely.
And that is the one apple that spoils the whole barrel, and that is typical.
But it also shouldn't spoil the whole barrel, right?
It's got to be. It reduces public confidence, and therefore any messages that we're trying to get out then become a bit muted, if you like. So it would be great, yes, to increase public trust. It would be great to do all the things that we're doing. I think in Police Scotland, we're quite lucky because we're not seen in the same way as they are down south. It's an entirely different society that we police, thankfully, and trust in the Police Scotland is probably higher than it is elsewhere in the UK. So we're lucky in that respect because we police by consent. So we need the public to be on board. We need them to feel like, actually, we are here for you. So in that sense, it's always going to be a challenge. As I say, people will come along who will diminish that with things that they do. But then hopefully as people meet, because people will say to me, oh yeah, like you're all right for a police officer, So yeah, and unfortunately maybe they've met people who aren't all right, but also people try and remain professional when they're doing the job, so they're not showing you their personality, so it's difficult. You can't say I hate all police officers or but I'd just like to hope that people will continue to go to the police if they need them. That's all I hope, and they will always be there for them. So
last thing, mental health and society then. Is which trajectory are we on based on what you've seen? Are we leveling? Are we on a downwards trajectory? Are we on an upwards trajectory because we're talking about it more? So society, is it turning a corner as it regards to mental health, or do you think actually, we're in trouble?
Just in my opinion, so the pandemic obviously has a massive impact on people's mental health. So for that reason, there's the dip. However, we are talking about it more. Unfortunately, the Scott Martin Foundation is tiny. But hopefully other organisations will come out that'll try and do the same thing. So for the recognising that people need help, that's the big thing. So for that reason, we're on an upward trajectory of getting that help for people, recognising it. And because remember as well, if we don't help young people now, how are they going to survive in the future?
Giving them the tools.
Not to quote Whitney Houston, but the children are the future. So it's giving them those tools because they're not as robust as we were when we were young. Because they're not out getting stitches and playing all day, so it's a different generation, and we have to make them that little bit tougher. And less offended by everything.
Yes.
So that anti-fragility needs to come in, right? Let's stop
definitely does,
making us
yeah.
all look for offence in every single thing
Yep.
that's been said. Because I'm sure if you play this podcast back, we've probably offended someone along the way accidentally.
Guaranteed.
Right?
Guaranteed.
But
yeah.
it's not meant.
No.
It's only when it's intentional that people should be taking offence.
100%.
Right? So let's stop being so fragile. Let's
Yep.
actually do the things that we're meant to do and help each other. Build each other up. Stop trying to tear each other down. And just recognise if someone needs you and be there for them, and let's get more organisations and more apps and more good things to help with people's mental health. There is a wealth of books out there they're not self-help books, they're just books that will really lift you. The Power of Now.
Yep.
What an amazing book that
Yep.
is. I think that changed me in a way as well. And now the ironic thing about it is I had to keep rereading parts of it because my mind would wander.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But it's all about staying in the present moment. And
Yep.
I'd be like, oh, I need to go back and read that bit of Total. Right? My mind wandered there. So but that book really just talks about, and like we were speaking about before we came in, you've got to live your life and you've got to do everything that you want to do in the now. But more than that, see when you're doing something, be fully present in doing that thing.
Yep.
Don't be worrying about what bills need to be paid.
Yep.
Don't be worrying about what you're going to cook for dinner tonight. Worry about that when you open the fridge and there's nothing there.
Yep.
Right? Don't just spend your day worrying about everything else that's going on around us, because otherwise you're not enjoying life as it's happening to you.
Love it. That I think is the best way to end the podcast. Carrie-Anne, thank you so much for coming in. I know you're on holiday this week and you've still climbed over those mountains to get to us.
Anything for messages about mental health.
Thank you
get
very
my
much.
rucksack on and climb back over the mountains.
Good stuff. Hopefully you'll come back again,
Yeah.
in future episodes. But yeah, thank you so much. I think there's so much to take away from that for our listeners. So really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, good stuff.